The permanent grime of burnt oil and grease was etched into the calloused hands of Hank Miller, an aroma as deeply ingrained in his life as his own name. His rough, weathered fingers, shaped by a lifetime of wrestling with metal and machinery, moved through a practiced ritual, wiping each tool with the same painstaking focus he dedicated to every vehicle that rolled into his garage. Miller's Garage, as the faded sign on the building's facade announced, had stood on the same corner in Harmony Creek for a quarter-century. The brick structure, with its massive metal bay doors and windows hazed over by the passage of time, had been a witness to more than just automotive repairs. It had seen a life poured into the singular mission of keeping people moving. Hank was intimately familiar with every crack in the aged brickwork, every oil stain on the concrete floor, and the particular way the building groaned when a strong wind blew, just as it was now. Winter had descended on the town early this year, bringing a piercing cold that felt as if it could freeze the very memories in a man's mind. Through the garage windows, clouded by years of exhaust fumes, Hank watched the first snowflakes of the season begin their silent dance under the sallow glow of the streetlights. The old wall clock, a relic his father George had hung on opening day, showed 7:43 p.m. In years past, the garage would still be humming with activity, cars lined up awaiting their turn. Now the only sounds were the howling wind, the clock's relentless ticking, and the rickety hum of the space heater in the corner. "At least it still works," he mumbled to himself, giving the old heater a grateful look. It was one of a handful of things in the garage that still did, alongside the toolbox he'd inherited from his father and his own stubborn will to keep the business from going under. Hank ran a hand through his graying hair, a sigh escaping his lips and forming a small white cloud in the frigid air. His eyes, which had overseen the resurrection of thousands of engines, drifted to the makeshift desk that served as his office. A stack of bills stood there like a leaning tower of financial doom. 3 notices from the bank, a delinquent electricity bill, and a final warning from his parts supplier. Its red final notice stamp a mocking presence under the flickering fluorescent light that blinked sporadically, as if it too was tired of the struggle. The town was changing, and not for the better, at least not for small business owners like him. Big franchise auto repair chains had been cropping up one after another, with their gleaming storefronts, state-of-the-art equipment, and seductive promotions that promised computerized diagnostics and extended warranties. Their modern facilities made Miller's Garage look like an artifact from a bygone era, a dinosaur fighting for its life in a digital world. The computer in the corner, his one major concession to the modern age, bought second-hand 3 years ago at the urging of his nephew, displayed numbers that told an unforgiving story. The spreadsheets Kevin, his nephew, had taught him to use laid out a harsh reality. In 6 months, maybe fewer, he would have to close the doors for good if something didn't change dramatically. "Tomorrow will be better," he murmured, repeating the mantra his father had always used, though the words felt heavier and less convincing with each passing day. It was a phrase George Miller often spoke, even in the leanest of times, when customers were few and the bills were high. Hank finished stowing the last of his tools in the metal cabinet, each one returned to its proper place, a habit ingrained in him since he first learned the trade. Old George always said a well-organized shop was the reflection of a competent mechanic. The memory of his father brought a sad smile to his lips. George had built this garage from nothing, transforming an abandoned warehouse into one of the most respected businesses in the area. Back then, Harmony Creek was a town where people knew each other by name, where a handshake carried more weight than a contract, and where a man's word was his greatest asset. Hank could still vividly picture the day his father handed him the keys to the garage, just before he retired. George's fingers, as calloused then as Hank's were now, trembled just slightly as he held out the key ring. "Take good care of her, son," were his words. "It's not just a shop, it's where we help people continue their journey." George passed away 2 years later, but Hank always felt his presence there, in the tools he still used, the advice he still followed, and the way he treated every customer like they were family. The wind howled louder outside, making the old windows rattle in their frames. Hank pulled on his worn-out jacket, a gift from a long-ago Christmas when he was still married. The threadbare fabric seemed to hold a faint trace of Susan's scent, or perhaps it was just his imagination. She had left 5 years ago, tired of the constant financial strain and the unending routine. "You love that shop more than you love me," were her last words before she moved to Scottsdale with an insurance salesman who offered stability and comfort. Hank never held it against her. Maybe she was right. The garage had been his whole world, his first thought in the morning and his last at night. How many birthday dinners had he missed for a client's emergency? How many weekends had been sacrificed to finish urgent repairs? How many plans were put on hold because any extra cash had to be reinvested in the business? The snow was coming down harder by the time he finally locked the doors. The sky was a black canvas, turning the town into a labyrinth of shadows punctuated by the yellow glow of street lamps. Instead of going straight home, something pulled him to take a drive. Maybe it was the loneliness that felt heavier on nights like this, or maybe it was a premonition he couldn't yet put a name to. His old Ford Escort, which he kept running more out of sheer stubbornness than practicality, groaned when he turned the key. The engine coughed twice before sputtering to life, sending a familiar shudder through the worn steering wheel. Hank knew every noise and tremor of that car as well as he knew his own breathing. It was more than just a car, it was a silent partner in his solitary existence. The heater took a few minutes to kick in, just enough time for the cold to find its way through every crack in the car's frame. Hank glanced in the rearview mirror, noticing the new lines etched around his eyes. When had he gotten so old? It felt like just yesterday he was that young, eager mechanic taking the keys from his father. The streets were almost empty at this hour, transformed into white passages by the unceasing snowfall. The Escort's headlights sliced through the darkness, revealing a town that looked almost alien under the winter's heavy blanket. Hank drove without a destination, his mind drifting between memories of the past and the anxieties of his uncertain future. He passed the old textile factory, now a derelict husk, its broken windows like vacant eyes staring into the night. How many times had he worked on the trucks that once rumbled in and out of that place, laden with fabrics, bound for every corner of the country? He could almost hear the din of the machinery, see the workers coming and going, smell the cotton in the air. Now only pigeons and stray cats haunted its ruins, the silence broken only by the wind whistling through the peeling walls. The town was littered with ghosts like that, businesses that had folded, dreams that had expired, lives that had moved on. The old gas station where Hank used to get his coffee on Sunday mornings now had a sold sign hanging on its rusty gate. Another family business devoured by modern self-service stations where you could fill up your tank without ever speaking to another human being. The radio crackled, catching only static and snippets of far-off music. Still, Hank left it on. The noise was better than the crushing silence, better than the thoughts that stalked him on nights like this. The snowfall grew heavier, creating a white curtain that drastically reduced visibility. He knew he should have gone home, but an unexplainable restlessness kept him on the road. That's when his headlights illuminated something out of place on the sidewalk. At first it was just a darker shadow against the snow-laden trees, but as he drew closer, the shape resolved into something more defined. Hank slowed the car, his heart picking up its beat for no reason he could name. Two figures stood starkly against the white void, one adult-sized, the other small, clearly a woman and a child. They were huddled under an umbrella that looked like it was about to surrender to the wind. Two small suitcases sat beside them, completing the strange, desperate picture. Snow fell on them without mercy, their silhouettes looking almost ghostly under the dim streetlights. Hank drove past, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. The snow was a blizzard now, and the temperature was still dropping. The car's display read 3 degrees CC. His small apartment, with its fickle heater and familiar loneliness, was waiting for him. The sensible thing, the safe thing, would have been to just keep driving, to ignore the scene as countless other drivers had likely already done. And yet, something about the sight of them resonated deep within him. Maybe it was their obvious vulnerability, or maybe it was because he knew all too well the crushing weight of being alone. He let out a slow breath, watching his taillights bleed red onto the falling snow. "God help me," he whispered, shifting the car into reverse. The Escort crept backward, its red lights painting the snowflakes. The two figures hadn't moved, as if they were frozen in place. Hank pulled up alongside the curb, his heart thumping against his ribs. In his 50-some years, he'd helped dozens of people with car trouble on lonely roads. But this felt different. "Do you need help?" he asked, rolling down the window, his voice as gentle as he could make it. The woman lifted her face, and Hank could see her delicate features etched with exhaustion. Her green eyes, when they met his, held a complex storm of wariness, desperation, and something else he couldn't quite name. Her dark hair, dusted with snow, framed a face that, in another life, would have been cheerful, but now seemed burdened with worry. We're just waiting for someone," she answered, her accent hinting that she wasn't from around here. The little girl beside her, no older than 4, clutched her mother's leg tighter. Golden curls peeked out from under a faded pink beanie, and her wide blue eyes watched Hank with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Hank's gaze fell on the 2 worn suitcases and the way they both shivered in the biting cold. The umbrella offered little protection, its ribs bent and its fabric torn. "In this weather, it's not safe to stay out here." The little girl let out a small, dry cough, a sound that seemed to echo with worry on the empty street. The woman pulled her closer, whispering soothing words that were stolen by the wind as her red, chapped hands adjusted the child's scarf. "My name is Hank," he said, shutting off the engine. The sudden silence made the wind and the falling snow seem even louder. "I'm a mechanic. My shop is a few blocks from here. I can show you my ID if you'd like." The woman's hesitation was a tangible thing, and Hank couldn't blame her. In this day and age, distrust was a survival mechanism. He could see the internal battle in her eyes, the fear of a stranger versus the desperate need for shelter. "Olivia," she finally said, her voice a near whisper. "And this is Lily." Lily looked up at Hank, her big blue eyes the color of a summer sky, a stark contrast to the freezing night. A snowflake landed on her small nose, making her blink. For a fleeting second, Hank saw the carefree child she was meant to be, happy and unworried, full of life. Olivia nodded, biting her lip. "Weck be all right," she insisted, but her voice trembled as much as her body. Her eyes darted constantly up and down the street, as if searching for something or someone in the long shadows cast by the streetlights. Hank glanced up at the sky, where the snow was now falling in a thick, dense sheet. It swirled under the streetlights, creating a white curtain that isolated this small stretch of sidewalk from the rest of the world. He thought of his modest apartment, the temperamental heater, the loneliness that awaited him. He thought of his own daughter, Megan, whom he hadn't seen in years, and how he would want someone to help her if she were in a situation like this. "I live nearby," he said, the decision surprising even himself. "It's not much, but I have a sofa bed, and heating you could." He trailed off, realizing how that might sound to a woman alone with her child on a night like this. Olivia studied his face for a long moment, and Hank held perfectly still, letting her see nothing but the truth. A tired, worried, middle-aged man offering help in the only way he knew how. The wrinkles around his eyes, his calloused hands on the steering wheel, the worn work coveralls under his jacket. It all told the story of a simple, honest life. A stronger gust of wind whipped down the street, making Lily shiver violently. The umbrella finally gave up the fight, one of its metal ribs snapping with a crack that seemed to echo in the night. That sound, more than anything, seemed to be the tipping point for Olivia. "Are you sure we won't be a burden?" Her voice was a mix of hope and apprehension, each word carefully weighed. No burden at all," Hank assured her, getting out of the car to grab their bags. "Besides, my conscience wouldn't let me sleep knowing you two were out here in this weather." The suitcases were surprisingly light, as if packed in a hurry with only the most essential items. He also noted they were high-quality, expensive pieces of luggage, though they showed signs of recent hard use, another piece of the puzzle that didn't quite fit. The walk to his apartment was a quiet one, punctuated only by the crunch of their footsteps in the fresh snow and Lily's occasional labored breaths, suggesting she was fighting off more than just the cold. Hank led them through alleys that offered some protection from the wind, carefully choosing the most sheltered path. At every corner, he noticed Olivia glancing over her shoulder, her green eyes scanning the shadows with an intensity that spoke of a deep, genuine fear. His building was one of the oldest on the street, its facade showing decades of neglect in its cracks and water stains. The front door groaned as Hank turned a rusty key in the lock. The dimly lit lobby, illuminated by a single flickering bulb, smelled of mildew and cheap disinfectant. "It's on the 3rd floor," he explained, starting up the stairs. The dim light threw eerie shadows on the peeling walls. "The elevator been out of service for months. I'm sorry." Olivia murmured that it was fine, but Hank could hear her breathing getting heavier with each flight. Lily, still clinging to her mother's hand, dragged her small feet on every step, clearly at the end of her rope. Her face was flushed from the cold, and her occasional coughs echoed in the empty stairwell. On the 3rd floor, Hank stopped in front of apartment 302, one of 4 doors on a narrow hall. The metal numbers were crooked, and the paint was peeling, but the lock was new, one of the few indulgences he'd allowed himself after a recent string of break-ins in the neighborhood. "This is it," he announced, opening the door. It was dark inside, but he could feel Olivia's gaze taking everything in as he fumbled for the light switch. "It's not much, but it's warm." The light revealed a small living room, clean but sparsely furnished. A well-worn but tidy sofa bed dominated one wall, flanked by an old armchair that had been his father's, one of the few things Hank had kept after Susan left. A small TV sat on a stand made from wooden crates he'd salvaged from the garage and sanded down. On the walls hung several black and white photos of classic cars and a younger Hank working on them. They were more than just decorations. They were markers of his life, moments captured on film that told the story of his garage, his craft, and who he was. One photo, yellowed with age, showed his father on opening day, his proud smile forever captured in that moment of hope. "We don't want to trouble you," Olivia started, but her stomach betrayed her with a loud growl, causing Lily to giggle, the first truly childlike sound Hank had heard from her. Hank smiled, a warmth spreading through his chest at that small spark of normalcy. "It's no trouble at all. Sophie, do you like vegetable soup?" Lily nodded shyly, still not letting go of her mother's hand, though her eyes now followed Hank's every move with open curiosity. He noticed she was clutching a small cloth doll, worn from love, its embroidered face nearly faded away. Soon the apartment was filled with the comforting smell of soup simmering on the stove, a simple recipe his mother had taught him years ago when he was first learning to live on his own. The ingredients were humble: vegetables, a bit of meat, basic seasonings. But there was something about the process that always brought him comfort, as if each spoonful contained a piece of the maternal love he had long missed. While the soup heated, Hank made up the sofa bed with clean sheets that smelled of fabric softener and laid out extra blankets. He also found an old T-shirt that could serve as a nightgown for Lily. It was plain but clean and soft from countless washings. For a moment he held it, remembering his own daughter, Megan, wearing something similar on nights just like this, so long ago. Megan would be almost 20 now. The last time he'd seen her was on her 15th birthday, a short, awkward visit at a coffee shop in Scottsdale. Susan was there, of course, with her new husband, the insurance salesman who promised her a life Hank never could. Megan had barely made eye contact that day, answering his questions with polite, distant monosyllables. Since then, their contact had been limited to holiday cards and the occasional text message. The bubbling of the soup brought him back to the present. He served 3 bowls, placing them on his small kitchen table with some bread that, while not fresh, was still good when warmed. Steam rose from the bowls, fogging up the window that looked out onto a street, now completely white. "This is delicious," Olivia commented after her first spoonful, some color returning to her cheeks from the warmth. Her hands still trembled slightly as she held the spoon, but her eyes had lost some of the frantic tension he'd seen earlier. Lily ate with a hunger that suggested she hadn't had a hot meal in days. Between spoonfuls, she cast curious glances at Hank, who pretended not to notice, giving her the space to feel safe. There was something in her small gestures that reminded him of Megan at that age. The same way of blowing on her soup, the same way she'd wipe her mouth on the back of her hand when she thought no one was looking. "We're heading to Waverly," Olivia said suddenly, as if feeling the need to offer some explanation. Her voice tried to sound casual, but there was an undercurrent of tension Hank didn't miss. "We had an issue with our connection." Hank nodded without pressing for more. Something in the way she said issue hinted at a much more complicated, perhaps painful story. Years of working in his garage had taught him that sometimes people needed quiet understanding more than they needed prying questions. How many times had he heard similar stories in his garage, from people with problems just trying to move on, leaving behind lives that had broken down like engines beyond repair? They finished their meal in a comfortable silence, broken only by the clinking of spoons and Lily's yawns, which were growing more frequent. Her blue eyes were closing for longer and longer stretches, her head drooping to one side before she'd jerk it back up. Olivia noticed her daughter's exhaustion and quickly finished her own meal. "Let'n get you ready for bed, sweetie," she said softly, her voice taking on a truly maternal tone for the first time. Hank watched as Olivia helped Lily into the borrowed T-shirt, which came down to the girl's knees like an improvised dress. The child could barely keep her eyes open, mumbling something about her doll, which she still clutched tightly. Within minutes, Lily was fast asleep on the sofa bed, her soft, even breathing filling the living room with a peaceful rhythm that somehow made the apartment feel less empty. Olivia gently tucked the blankets around her daughter, her fingers lingering on the golden curls spread across the pillow. "Would you like some tea?" Hank asked quietly, not wanting to wake the sleeping child. Olivia hesitated for a moment before nodding, following him into the small kitchen. The silence between them as Hank made the tea wasn't awkward. It was the kind of quiet shared by two people who, though strangers, understood the fragility of life and the value of small kindnesses. "Thank you," she finally said, her hands wrapped around the steaming mug as if seeking not just its warmth, but also some kind of anchor in reality. Not just for the food and shelter, but for not asking questions. Hank watched the steam rise from his own mug, thinking of all the stories he'd heard in his garage, of all the people who came looking for more than just a car repair. "Sometimes," he replied softly, "the most important kindness is knowing when not to ask." Through the kitchen window, they could see the snow still falling, though more gently now, as if the night itself was settling down. The street lights cast yellow halos on the white ground, and occasionally a car would pass by slowly, its headlights cutting through the darkness like luminous blades. The kitchen clock showed nearly midnight when Hank finally went to his bedroom, leaving Olivia to settle in on the sofa bed next to her sleeping daughter. The apartment fell into a deep silence, broken only by the occasional creak of old pipes and the distant howl of the wind. Lying in bed, Hank thought about how a life could change in just a few hours. That morning, he was just a lonely mechanic on the brink of losing his garage. Now, by some twist of fate, his apartment was harboring two strangers with secrets he couldn't begin to guess. Then he heard it, a low murmur from the living room, so soft he first thought it was the wind. But soon he recognized Olivia's voice, speaking urgently into a phone, trying her best to stay quiet. "No, he hasn't found us. We're safe for now." A pause. "Yes, I managed to take enough before no. I can't say where we are." Another, longer pause. "I know it's risky, but we had no choice. Sophie is exhausted. We couldn't keep going." Hank tried not to hear any more, turning over in bed and pulling the pillow over his head. That conversation wasn't for him, and the less he knew, the better. Still, the few words he'd overheard painted a troubling picture. Who was he? What were they running from? The rest of the night passed slowly. Hank slept in fits and starts, waking to noises both real and imagined. In his waking moments, he thought of his own daughter, of how unpredictable and sometimes cruel life could be. What could possibly have happened to make Olivia flee into a winter storm with a small child? Dawn broke with a surprisingly clear sky. The snow had stopped overnight, leaving Harmony Creek draped in a pristine white blanket. Hank woke to the sounds of soft movement in the kitchen, quiet footsteps, the clinking of mugs, hushed voices. When he emerged from his bedroom, he found Olivia and Lily already dressed, their small suitcases packed and standing by the door. The kitchen was immaculate, the sofa bed neatly made up as if no one had slept on it. "We need to go." "Oh," Olivia said the moment she saw him, her tone polite but firm. "We've already taken too much of your kindness." Lily, more awake and less shy than the night before, ran over and hugged his legs. "Thank you for dinner, Uncle Jack," she said in her small voice, making his heart ache. "You don't have to rush," Hank replied, noticing they had washed not only their breakfast dishes, but also the pot from the night before. "I could drive you to the bus station if you want." "You're very kind," Olivia interjected, taking her daughter's hand. "But we've already called a taxi. It's better this way." Her eyes avoided his, as if she were afraid he might read secrets in them that needed to stay hidden. Hank saw her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted Lily's coat. There was an urgency about her, a need to leave before what? "At least take this," he insisted, pulling a few bills from his wallet. It wasn't much. He was struggling himself, but he couldn't let them leave with nothing. "No, please," Olivia refused firmly, finally looking him in the eye. "You've already done more than enough." She hesitated, as if weighing her next words. "There are still good people in this world, Jack. You're one of them." A car horn honked from the street below. The taxi was here. Olivia grabbed the suitcases with a practiced speed while Lily clutched her inseparable doll. In moments, they were heading down the stairs, their footsteps echoing in the empty stairwell. Hank followed them to the building's entrance, watching as they got into the cab. Through the car window, Lily waved, her small face lit with a smile that, for a moment, banished all the shadows of the previous night. Olivia simply gave him a nod, her green eyes meeting his one last time in a look that conveyed more gratitude than any words could. The taxi pulled away, disappearing around the corner and taking its mysterious passengers with it. The snow from the night before was already starting to melt under the morning sun, dripping into the gutters. The town was slowly waking up, resuming its daily rhythm as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. But something extraordinary had happened, Hank thought as he climbed the stairs back to his apartment. On a mundane winter night, his lonely life had briefly intersected with the lives of two fugitives. From what or whom he would likely never know. Back in his apartment, he saw something on the kitchen table, a drawing Lily had made on a piece of paper. It showed a simple house with 3 smiling figures in front, one tall, presumably him, and 2 smaller ones, clearly Olivia and Lily. In the corner, in carefully drawn, childish letters, it read, "For Uncle Jack, with love." Hank picked up the drawing carefully, a bittersweet smile on his face as he stuck it to the refrigerator with a magnet. His eyes fell on the clock. In 2 hours he had to open the garage and face another day of financial worries and uncertainty. But something had changed. The loneliness that had once felt so suffocating was now tempered by a new perspective. His own problems seemed smaller in comparison to the secrets and fears that Olivia and Lily carried with them. The sound of a car passing slowly outside drew his attention. It was a dark sedan with tinted windows, different from the taxi that had taken his guests. The driver slowed as he passed the building, and for a moment Hank felt a chill run down his spine. Watching the car disappear down the street, Hank couldn't have known that the cold winter night was just the beginning, that his simple act of kindness was actually the first chapter in a much larger story. A story that would show him that sometimes angels don't have wings and halos, but arrive with battered suitcases and frightened eyes, seeking shelter from storms, both literal and metaphorical. The clock continued its steady ticking, marking the start of a new day. But for Hank, it was more than that. It was the start of something new, even if he didn't know what it was yet. Holding Lily's drawing like a talisman of hope, he prepared to face another day at the garage, carrying with him the mystery of that winter night and the certainty that sometimes the greatest gifts arrive disguised as chance encounters in a snowstorm. The garage felt even quieter than usual that afternoon. Lily's drawing, which Hank had brought from home and discreetly pinned to a corner of his desk, was the only spot of color among the neatly arranged tools and the looming stack of overdue bills. 3 days had passed since he'd sheltered Olivia and her daughter, but the memory of them was as vivid as the scent of soup had been in his apartment. "Final notice," he muttered, running his calloused fingers over the red stamp on yet another unpaid bill. The bank had called that morning, the manager's voice a practiced blend of sympathy and professional firmness. The numbers didn't lie. In a matter of weeks, maybe days, he would have to make a final decision about the garage's future. The last customer of the day had left half an hour earlier, leaving behind a payment for a minor repair that barely covered the cost of the parts. Hank stared at the crumpled bills in his hand, wondering how much longer he could keep the doors open and honor the legacy his father had built with so much sweat. The chime of the front door jolted him from his thoughts. For a brief, absurd moment, his heart leaped, thinking it might be Olivia and Lily. But the figure who stepped inside couldn't have been more different. He was a tall man, impeccably dressed in a gray suit that probably cost more than all the equipment in the garage combined. "Mr. Hank Morris," the man asked, his polite tone carrying the refined accent of a big city. He held an Italian leather briefcase, completing an image of sophistication that seemed utterly out of place amidst the grease and tools. "Yes," Hank replied automatically, wiping his hands on the rag he always kept in his coverall pocket. A smudge of oil on his cheek made him suddenly self-conscious. "Philip Lamar from Lamar and Associates in New York," the man introduced himself, offering a business card as elegant as his suit. "I'm here on a matter of utmost importance to discuss with you." Hank gestured to the only free chair in his small office area, hastily clearing a stack of invoices off the makeshift desk. Mark sat with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to far more luxurious surroundings. "Mr. Morris, I'm here as the legal representative of a client who wishes to remain anonymous," he began, opening his briefcase and retrieving a set of documents. "This client has expressed the desire to make a substantial donation to your establishment." Hank blinked, sure he had misheard. "A donation, precisely." Lamar adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses. "The amount in question is $2 million. "Thessalance," that followed. Wasothic Hanks ud Harthaticking off the same old clocky Svather had installed decades ago. His mind struggled to process the numbertha that be and delivered so casually. "You must be mistaken," he finally managed. "Why would anyone? There's no mistake." "Mr. Morris," Lamar interrupted gently, sliding a document across the desk. "All the paperwork is in order. The transfer can be made as soon as you sign the necessary." For Miss Hank picked up the document, his hands trembling. The words seemed to swim before his eyes. Legal jargon, clauses, numbers that felt unreal. His gaze drifted to Lily's drawing, and for a fleeting moment, a suspicion formed in his mind. Theta norturely, once domain anonymous, addis non-negotiable, Lamar replied, his tone leaving no room for discussion. The client was very clear about it. Hank's attention returned to the papers. Among the legal terms and mind-boggling figures, online stood out, in recognition of selfless acts of kindness and the preservation of fundamental human values, while the questions leapt out before he could stop it. Lamarella wed as smalls mileto formon his lips. My Clint believes there are people who deserve a second chance, people who keep alive care, tine values that our modern society seems to have forgotten. The lawyer Polita Mont Blanc penned from Hyson, near jacket pocket and of her edito Hank. The choice, as of course yours butlet menoted, had opportunities like this rarely present themselves twice in a lifetime. Hank looked around his garage. The neatly organized tools his father had to ug them to respect, the oil stains on the floor that told the store as of countless repairs, the photos on the wall that documented a life spent helping people move forward. He thought of Olivia and Lily, of how a single act of kindness could create ripples far beyond what he could see. With a clarity that surprised him, he realized it didn't matter who was behind the donation. What mattered was what he would do with it. "Where do I sign?" asked, taking the pen. Lemmer expertly guided him through the process, pointing to the signature lines with the precision of a man who had spent a lifetime handle important documents. When it was done, the lawyer placed the papers back in his brief case as carefully as a jeweler handling a precious gem. "The funds will be available in your account within 48 hours, He informed Hank, standing up. "My office will be in touch to assist with any administrative or tax-related questions." Before he left, Lamar paused at the door and gave Hank a nailist look. "You know, Mr. Morrison, my line of work at swear to be part of something genuinely good. This is one of those rare moments." The chuff the closing door reverberated rough the empty garage. Hank remained seated, staring at the business card in his shandanda, T. Lily's drawing on his desk outside. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows there off the dusty windows, turning the garage into a kaleidoscope of light and shade. Somewhere in the world, he thought, maybe Olivia and Lily were safe now, moving forward with their lives. He would never know for sure if there was a connection between that snowy night and what had just happened, and maybe that was for the best. The old clock kept ticking, the same steady sound that had accompanied this day since childhood. But for the first time in a long, long time, that sound no longer carried the weight of a point. Instead, it seemed to mark the beginning of something new, something far beyond just saving a garage. Hank stood up slowly and walked to the wall where his father's photo smiled in black and white. "You always said helping people keep going was more important than just fixing cars," he murmured to the image. "I think I finally understand what you mean." To add with a deep breath, he turned to his desk and began to do something he hadn't done in a long time, plan for the future. Ideas began to take shape in his mind, ideas about how this unexpected giften or justo savet the garage, buto transform it into something more, something his father would be proud of. Lily's drawing remained quietly in the corner of the desk, its smiling figures bearing witness to them, mental only, mechanic, life changed, forever. The garage clock read 8:47 p.m. when Hank finally placed the documents left by Philip Limarinda, his own well-worn leather briefcase. His hands, calloused from decades of mechanical labor, trembled slightly as she fastened the metal latch. $2 million. The number danced in his mind, impossible to fully grasp. The garage, usually so familiar, felt alien that night. The shadows cast by the hanging tools seemed to ants strangely under the flickering flue, or scent lights, and the smell of oil and metal, normally a source of comfort for Hank, felt almost overpowering. Or maybe it was just that his senses were tended by the shock. The lawyer, business card felta, chevias liden hispo, ket, though it was only paper. Hank pulled a deed out again, running his fingers over the embossed Latin as Philip Lamar, Lamer and Associates. The New York address, printed in elegant script, might as well have been known another planet, in universe of luxury offices and life-altering decisions, a universe far removed from his own reality, Frenches and broken engines. By the time he stepped outside, night had completely fallen over Harmony CRE. The early spring wind still carried a hint of winter, making him pull his old jacket tighter. High-Soldford Escort waited in its usual spot, its faded paint catching the streetlighten a melancholy gleam. The car protested, as it always did, when he turned the ignition, the engine coughing twice before catching. Hank smiled to himself. Despite of the promise of immense wealth, his old companion remained stubbornly the same. Maybe that was a sign, he thought, that something should never change, no matter how big a bank account gets. The drive home had never felt so long. Every red light was an opportunity for Hisme and to wander, to question the reality of what had just happened. The familiar streets of Harmony Creek Simi dito slide by in slow motion, each familiar storefront now looking different under the glow of his changed circumstances. He passed the bakery, where he bought his bread every morning. Would a still to that, now that there was a millionaire. He passed Bob's diner, where he'd eaten breakfast for 2 decades. What would it be like to walk in there, knowing he could buy the whole place if he won Tedto? The old textile factory, boarded up, its broken windows like empty, yes, watching the night. How many stories like that could be prevented with the right investment at the right time? In his apartment, Hank couldn't sleep. Hessa Tathis kitchen table, Acupuff coffee growing cold, and spread out several sheets of paper. Hebaganto do calculations, numbers upa numbers, endless possibilities, unfolding before high, like a deck of cards, each own promising a different future. $2 million was natos of a thega rage, modernize it completely, and still leave a small fortune. But with the money came responsibilities, decisions, and unavoidable changes. How would he handle all of it? How could it preserve the essence of what his father had built while navigating Suchonfa familiar territory? What would you do, Dad? He murmured into. The silence of the apartment tea, his eyes fixed on Lily's drawing, still pinned to the fridge. The 3 smiling figures seemed to watch him, as if guarding a secret he couldn't quite decipher. Inevitably, his thoughts returned to Olivia and Lily. Could there be connection between that snow why night and this sudden turn of fortune? The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. If there was Alink, why the secrecy? Why all the mystery? As the night wore on, Hank's thoughts deepened. He remembered Olivia's words on the phone. No, he hasn't found as we're safe for now. Hawashi. And more importantly, was this money part of something bigger, something he shouldn't be involved in? Then his eyes fell on the photo of his father, that confident smile frozen in time, and Hank felt a certainty stir within him. George Miller had always said that oportun itias often come disguised as challenges, and the key was to keep your heart open and our mind clear. If this money was somehow connected to Olivia and Lily, then maybe it was the universe giving Heimlich and set to do even more good, to help even more people. Morning found Hank still at the kitchen table, the papers now covered in notes, sketches, and plans. His coffee was long cold, a brown ring on the tabletop marking his prod octave insomnia. When Hank stepped into the garage that day, he felt a shift in the town's atmosphere. Maybe it was just his own nerves, but he could have sworn people were looking at them differently. News of his sudden change in fortune seemed have a spread like wildfire. "Heard you had an interesting visitor yesterday," Bob mentioned casually when Hank stopped by the diner for his usual breakfast. The owner's tone was nonchalant, but his eyes glinted with barely concealed curiosity. "I'll wire from New York right." Hank stirred his coffee slowly, choosing his words with care. "Just some legal matters to sort out," he replied vaguely, realizing for the first time how hard it would be to maintain any privacy in a town where everyone knew everyone else. The diner's spell jingled as more customers came in, and Hank felt the weight of their gazes, the buzz of their whispers. In a small town like Harmony Creek, word traveled faster than any modern technology. By the end of the day, there would probably be a dozen different versions of a sudden windfall. Back at the garage, he found himself looking at his tools with no eyes. Each worn wrench, every pair of pliers with taped handles, told a story of years of hard work and honest service. But now, with the promise of millions, they also symbolized a past that would have it evolve. The first catalog of modern equipment arrived in the mail that afternoon. He had requested it weeks ago, back when he was still hoping for a small loan to make a few modest upgrades. Now, flipping through the glossy pages, he no longer had to limit himself to dreaming. State-of-the-art hydraulic lifts, computerized diagnostic systems, specialized tools for hybrid and electrics ARS. It was all within his reach. But every turned page brought new anxieties. It wasn't just about buying new equipment. It was about learning to sit, training people, restructuring the entire layout of the garage. The modernization he had dreamed of now seemed like a much bigger challenge than just signing checks. "We need to start small," he told himself, marking the most urgent items with a pencil. A new lift to replace, the current to let it grow, and add with every use, a basic computer diagnostic system to stop osing customers to the franchise shops, and a few specialized tools for the newer car models that were coming in more and more frequently. During this meticulous review, the first proposal arrived. A parts supplier that had never bothered to work with his small garage was now offering special terms, extraordinary discounts, and extended deadlines. Their representative, in his tailored suit and commercials, Mile, acted as if they had been lifelong friends. "Think of it as a mutual investment in our future," Mr. Morris, the man said, sliding a contract proposal across the desk. "Now that you're expanding your horizons." The condescending tone did notice Cape Hank. It was the semitone these representatives adduced for years to this machine, saying his grudge was too small to justify our attention. Now, drawn by the scent of money, they were arriving like bees to honey. Hank took the contract in his calloused hand, reading every line with the same care he will do say to diagnose a problematic engine. The terms looked good, almost too good. Hidden among the technical paragraphs were clauses about exclusivity and hidden penal ties that seemed innocuous but had teeth. "I'll need some time to review this," he said, handing the document back. Their representative couldn't completely hide his disappointment, clearly having expected an immediate signature. But perhaps I imagined that Hank's sudden wealth addled his common sense. The following weeks brought a steady stream of salesmen, representatives, and consultants of all sorts. Each owner had a different proposal, a revolutionary idea, or a surefire plan to turn Miller's garage into a national powerhouse. Some arrived in luxury cars, others carrying briefcases full of colorful L-charts and receipt projections. One of them, a young business consultant with a freshly minted MBA and a carefully crafted city accent, spent 2 hours explaining how Hank could earn his garage into a national franchise. "You could have 50, maybe 100 locations in 5 years," he declared, brimming with enthusiasm for the numbers she envisioned in his own bank account. We'd standardize everything, create a strong brand, and expand into their cities. Hank listened patiently, just as she had listened to customers' problems for years. But something inside him was cautious. His father's words echoed in his memory. An honest mechanic is worth more than a shop full of shiny tools. It was during one of these visits that the first tangible sign of change arrived at the garage. Alligator truck parked outside on Tuesday morning, delivering the new hydraulic lift. Hank Hotto ordered. The installation drew a small crowd of onlookers, neighbors, former clients, even a few competitors, observing from a distance with inscrutable expressions. "Is it true you're turning this place into a franchise?" Someone in the crowd asked, while the technic Ian set up the equipment. "I heard he's steering it all down to build a brand new place," said another. "Must be a big group of investors behind this." Hank simply smiled and shook his head, focusing on the installation to ensure everything was done properly. The new lift was just the beginning. He had already ordered a computerized diagnostic system and some specialized tools. Yet he might each purchase thoughtfully, each change planned as carefully as she would approach the most delicate Ovengene repair with new equipment. Came a new reality. He needed help. He could no longer run everything by himself, especially with the advanced technology acquiring specialized knowledge. Hiring employees proved to be one of his most challenging decisions so far, not just for practical reasons, but for what it meant to alter his solitario routine. The first hit was Kevin, his nephew, who had long insisted on working at the garage. With a degree in mechanical engineering and expertise in automotive electronics, he was essential for handling the new system. As Hank remembered Kevin as a child, playing with toy cars on the garage floor while his father worked. Now, at 25, he brought not only technical skills, but also an infectious enthusiasm for the future. Next came Cody, a young trainee from the local technical colleague, full of energy and eager to learn. Hank met him by chance when the boy stopped by, looking for a potential internship. There was something in Cody's eyes, a mix of determination and humility, that reminded Hank of himself decades earlier. Finally, Betty, an administrative assistant recommended by an old customer, joined to handle the growing paperwork. At 45, divorced with 2 kids single age, she brought valuable life experience and a methodical knack for organizing tasks. Her practical approach soon became indispensable to the garage's daily operations. "You rechanging the whole look off this street," Bob commented a few weeks later when Hank came Ibiza dinner for his morning coffee. Indeed, the transformation was obvious. The garage's facade had been renovated, although Hank insisted on keeping the old CGN, just restoring its colors. The windows were now clean and bright, allowing passers-by a glimpse of the gleaming new equipment inside. But not all changes were visible or positive. With growth came the first conflicts. Spring had finally arrived in Harmony Creek, transforming the town into a mosaic of color, arts, and scents. The trees lining the street near Hank's garage were delicate blossoms, their branches swaying gently in the Mildbur breeze. It was a morning like many others, or so it seemed, until the door chime sounded in a way that all change everything once again. Hank was leaning over the new diagnostic system, trying to interpret a set of particularly complex error code, sonolate model BMW, when Betty called his attention. "Mr. Morris, there are 2 customers here a skin for you." Something in Betty's tone made him look up immediately. She rarely interrupted him during a diagnose, unless it was truly important. Wiping his hands on the ever-present shop rag, Hank headed for the renovated, yet still cozy reception area. That was when his heart nearly stopped. Standing by the counter were people he'd never forgotten, Olivia and Lily. But they were no longer the mess the night he took them in from the storm. Their transformation was remarkable. Olivia wore stylish navy blue business suit tee, hair unset disheveled, dark hair now perfectly styled, framing a face that, though it still bore traces of concern, radiated a new, calm confidence. Beside her stood Lily, now a bittler, in a floral Dressantiony leather shoes. Her golden curls were neatly tied with a sateen ribbon, and her blue eyes, once so fearful, now beamed with childlike vitality. Mr. Jack, Lily reacted first, running toward him with open arms, all semblance of formality forgotten. In her childish enthusiasm, Hank knelt to hew her, noticing she still carried the same éclaircil, now visibly restored, but undeniably the same companion from that memorable night. "You kept my drawing?" Lily exclaimed, pointing to the wall behind the counter, where the picture she's deemed wasn't a framed eye in a simple butyl framing. "Of course, I kept it," Hank replied, his voice thick with emotion. "It's son of my most treasured possessions." Olivia approached then, the click of her heels echoing on the new shop floor. Her perfume was subtle but sophisticated, a world away from the scent of Arendek's house Tiantha had surrounded, Hirontat Snowini, GHT. "Jack," she said simply, extending her hand. But instead of shaking it, Hank pulled her into a brief, warm hug. "Here, it's good to see you both," he said, aware of how his employees watched the scene with undisguised curiosity. "Shall we go into my office?" Hank's office was one of the foyer as in the garage that retained its original simplicity, though it now featured modern computer, equipment and air conditioning. The walls still bore the same old photograph including the one of his father on opening de why you haven't changed a thing, Olivia observed, scanning the room with a nostalgic smile. "Some things don't need changing," Hank replied, indicating chairs for them. "But yout will you look wonderful." Olivia nodded, settling Lily into her lap. "Where warily are in fact, Jack, I came fort wu reasons first to say thank you and second to explain." Hank raised his hand. "You'dn't tell mean explanation." "Ido," Olivia insisted, especially after she motioned vaguely toward their novatage, are visible through the office window after everything. And so, Olivia began her story. Lily played absently with Hurdle, seemingly oblivious to the adults' conversation, though she occasionally glanced up with keen interest. "My real name is Elise Deo," she began. "I more was CEO of Deo Technologies, one of the largest cybersecurity software companies in the country." She paused, watching Hank's reaction. "You'd probably never heard of it, but your sisters Istems protect some of the biggest corporate ions in America." Hank nodded slowly. The name Deo sounded vaguely familiar, maybe from a news article somewhere. 2 years ago I discovered some discrepancy in our books at first. I thought they were here, roars, but the more I investigated, the more I realized I was dealing with something huge." Olivia lowered her voice. "Thought they were alone. My ex-husband Henry, who was CFO, was involved in money laundering he was using Gaurko Empanias front for questionable Operation S." Sophie snuggled closer to her mother, as if sensing the tension in her words. Olivia automatically stroked her daughter's share, the gesture offering comfort as much to hers Elfasto Sophie. "When I confronted Henry, he did not react well. He threatened to take Sophie from a to his connections to destroy me, professionally, legally. He had powerful contacts, people who would do anything for money." She took a deep breath. "So he did the only thing I could have gathered, alt evidence. I could find sent it to the author. Iris through secure channels took Sophia Endren." Hank recalled the night they found them standing in this now, with only 2 small suitcases. It now made sense why their luggage seemed steelily packed and why Olivia constantly looked over her shoulder. "Is spent months in hiding," she continued, moving from city to city, staying under assume at name and cheap motels, Henry Haid resources P. Eopal searching, forests that show, Weenda Dupe in Ridgemont, that snowy night tour money was almost gone, the car had broken down miles away, and Sophie had a fever, and the new appeared. Sophie interrupted suddenly, looking away from her doll. Like an angel, Mummy said. Hank felt his cheeks warm. I just did what Niona would do now. Olivia shook her head emphatically. Not everyone would open their home into to Wastrangjona winter's night note. Everyone would offer help without questions or demands you gave us more than a roof that night. Jack, you gave us hope. She paused, taking an envelope out of her leather briefcase. The authorities finally acted on the evidence. I provided. Henry is in prison along with Severa Loftus Associates, the company under we enter complete. Over Howland I resumed control 6 months ago. Hank looked at the envelope in her hands, a suspicion forming in his mind. The donation, he said simply. Olivia nodded. It was the least I could do, and I took back on Trelone of my first acts was off in the way Torre, pay what Yowed, but it had to be discreet through intermediaries. There were still Lara dangerous people out there. Million. The silence that followed was so thick. Hank old heart the ticking off the same old clock he Sfather had installed decades ago. His mind struggled to process then Umbertha that being delivered so casually. You must be mistaken, he finally managed. Why would anyone? There's no mistake. Mr. Morris, Lamar interrupted gently, sliding a document across the desk. All the paperwork is in order, the transfers, and be made as soon as you sign the necessary for. Miss Hank picked up the document, his hands trembling. The words seemed to swim before his eyes. Legal jargon, clauses, numbers that felt unreal. His gaze drifted to Lily's drawing, and for a fleeting moment, a suspicion formed in his mind. They Don Orcherly, once Dormain, anonymous, Addis non-negotiable, Lamar replied, his tone leaving no room for discussion. The client was very clear about it. Hank's attention returned to the papers. Among the legal terms and mind-boggling figures, online stood out. In recognition of selfless acts of kindness and the preservation of fundamental human values, Wyme, the questions leapt out before he could stop it. Lamaralawid asmals mileto formon highslip s. My client believes there are people who deserve a conscience, people who keep alive here, tying values that our modern society seems to have forgotten. The lawyer pulled a Mont Blanc pen from his in her jacket pocket and a for a ditto. Hank. The choice is of course yours, but let me note it, had opportunities like this rarely present themselves twice in a lifetime. Hank looked around his garage, the neatly organized tools his father had of them to respect, the oil stains on the floor that told the store eyes of countless repairs, the photos on the wall that documented a life spent helping people move forward. He thought of Olivia and Lily, of how a single act of kindness could create ripples far beyond what he could see. With a clarity that surprised him, he realized it didn't matter how was behind the donation. What mattered was what he would do with it. Where do I sign? Hesked, taking the pen. Lammer expertly guided him through the process, pointing to the signature lines with the precision of a man who had spent a lifetime handling important documents. When it was done, the lawyer placed the papers back in his briefcase as carefully as a jeweler handling a precious gem. The funds will be available in your account within 48 hours. Informed Hank, standing up. My office will be in touch to assist with any administrative or tax-related questions. Before he left, Lamar paused at the door and gave Hank O'Neill's to look. You know, Mr. Morrison, my line of work, it's rare to be part of something genuinely good. This is one of those rare moments. The closing door reverberated through the empty garage. Hank remained seated, staring at the business card in his handanda, tea lilies, drawing on his desk outside. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the dusty windows, turning the garage into a kaleidoscope of light and shade. somewhere in the world, he thought, maybe Olivia and Lily were safe now, moving forward with their lives. He would never know for sure if there was a connection between that snowy night and what had just happened, and maybe that was for the best. The old clock kept ticking, the semi-steady sound that had accompanied his days since childhood. But for the first time in a long, long time, that sound no longer carried the weight of woe. Right instead, it seemed to mark the beginning of something new, something far beyond just saving a garage. Hank stood up slowly and walked to the wall ere his father's photo smiled in black and white. You always said helping people keep going was more important than just fixing cars, he murmured to the image. I think I finally understand what you meant, he added. With a deep breath, he turned to his desk and began to do something he hadn't done in a long time, plan for the future. Ideas began to take shape in his mind, ideas about how to this unexpected giftin or just to save the garage, but to transform it into something more, something his father would be proud of. Lily Strawn remained quietly in the corner off the desk, its smiling figures bearing witness to them o mental only mechanic life changed forever. The garage's clock read 8:47 p.m. when Hank finally placed the documents left by Philip, lammer into his own worn leather briefcase. His hands, calloused from decades of mechanic labor, trembled slightly as he fastened the metal latch, $2 million. Then umber danced in his mind, impossible to fully grasp. The garage, usually so familiar, felt alien that night. The shadows cast by the hanging tools seemed to dance strangely under the flickering flue or ascent lights, and the smell of oil and metal, normally a source of comfort for Hank, felt almost overpowering. Or maybe it was just that his senses were high, tainted by the shock. The lawyer's business card felt heavily in his pocket, though it was only paper. Hank pulled it out again, running his fingers over the embossed letter R.S. Philip Lamar, Lamar and Associates. The New York address, printed in elegant script, might as well have been known another planet, in a universe of luxury offices and life-altering decisions, a universe far removed from his own reality of wrenches and broken engines. By the time he stepped outside, night had completely fallen over Harmony, Xer-Eek. The early spring wind still carried a hint of winter, making him pull his sole jacket tighter. High-soled Ford Escort waited in its usual spot, its faded paint catching the street light in a melancholy gleam. The car protested, as it always did, when he turned the ignition, the engine coughing twice before catching. Hank smiled to himself. Despite the promise of immense wealth, high-souled companion remained stubbornly the same. Maybe that was a sign, he thought, that some things should never change, no matter how big a bank account gets. The drive home had never felt so long. Every red light was an opportunity for his mind to wander, to question the reality of what had just happened. The familiar streets of Harmony Creek seemed to slide by in slow motion, each familiar storefront now looking different under the glow of his changed circumstances. He passed the bakery where he bought his bread every morning. Would he still do that, now that there was a millionaire? He passed Bob's diner where he'd eaten breakfast for 2 decades. What would it be like to walk in there, knowing he could buy the whole place if he wanted to? The old textile factory, boarded up, its broken windows like empty eyes watching the night. How many stories like that could be prevented with the right investment at the right time? In his apartment, Hank couldn't sleep. Hesatathis kitchen table, Acupuff coffee growing cold, and spread out several sheets of paper. He began to do calculations, numbers super numbers, endless possibilities unfolding before he Malakatikov cards, each one promising a different future. $2 million was not to Savithega rage, modernize it completely, and still leave Asmal fortune, but with the money came responsibilities, decisions, and inevitable changes. How would he handle all of it? How could he preserve the essence of what his father had built while navigating Suchunfa, familiar territory. What would you do, Dad? He murmured into the silence. Of the apartmentee, his eyes fix on Lily's drawing, still pinned to the fridge. The three smiling figures seemed towachi me asifguardinga secretha couldn't quite decipher. Inevitably, his thoughts returned to Olivia and Lily. Could there be connection between that snowy night and this sudden turn of fortune? The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. But if there was a link, why the secrecy? Why all the mystery? As the night wore on, Hank's thoughts deepened. He remembered Olivia's words on the phone. No, he hasn't found us. We're safe for now. Hawashi, and more importantly, was this money part of something bigger, something it shouldn't be involved in? Then his eyes fell on the photo of his father, that confident smile frozen in time, and Hank felt a certainty stir within him. George Miller had always said that opportunities often come disguised to challenges, and the key was to keep your heart open and your mind clear. If this money was somehow connected to Olivia and Lily, then maybe it was the universe giving Heimlich and Ceredo even more good to help even more people. Morning found Hank still at the kitchen table, the papers now covered in notes, sketches, and plans. His coffee was long cold, a brown ring on the tabletop marking his octave insomnia. When Hank stepped into the garage that day, Heffelta shifting the town's atmosphere. Maybe it was just his own nerves, but I could have sworn people were looking at them differently. News of a sudden change in fortune seemed have spread like wildfire. Heard you had an interesting visitor yesterday, Bob mentioned casually when Hank stopped by the diner for his usual breakfast. The owner's tone was nonchalant, but his eyes glinted with barely concealed curiosity. A lawyer from New York, right? Hank stirred his coffee slowly, choosing his words with care. Just some legal matters to sort out, he replied vaguely, realizing for the first time how hard it would be to maintain any privacy in a town where everyone knew everyone else. The diner's bell jingled as more customers came in, and Hank felt the weight of their gazes, the buzz of their whispers. In a small town like Harmony Creek, word traveled faster than any modern technology. By the end of the day, there would probably be dozen different versions of his sudden windfall. Back at the garage, he found himself looking at his tools with novice. Each worn wrench, every pair of pliers with taped handles, told a story of years of hard work and honest service. But now, with the promise of millions, they also symbolized a past that would have it evolve. The first catalog of modern equipment arrived in the mail that afternoon. He had requested it weeks ago, back when he was still hoping for a small loan to make a few modest upgrades. Now, flipping through the glossy pages, he no longer had to limit himself to dreaming. State-of-the-art hydraulic lifts, computerized diagnostic systems, specialized tools for hybrid and electric CARs. It was all within his reach. But every turned page brought new anxieties. It wasn't just about buying new equipment. It was about learning to see it, training people, restructuring the entire layout of the garage. The modernization he had dreamed of now seemed a much bigger challenge than just signing checks. When Nido start small, he told himself, marking the most urgent items with a pencil. A new lift to replace, the current knee, that grow and add with every use a basic computer diagnostic system to stopple osing customers to the franchise, shops, and a few specialized tools for the newer car models that were coming in more and more frequently. During this meticulous review, the first proposal arrived. A parts supplier that had never bothered to work with his small garage was no offerings PEQL terms, extraordinary discounts, and extended deadlines. Their representative, in his tailored suit and commercial smile, acted as if they had been lifelong friends. Think of it as a mutual investment in your future, Mr. Morris, Thiemann said, sliding a contract proposal across the desk. Now that you're expanding your horizons. The condescending tone did notice Cape Hank. It was the same tone this representative-ish adduced for years to his machine, saying his garage was too small to justify their attention. Now, drawn by the scent of money, they were arriving like bees to honey. Hank took the contract in his calloused hand, reading every line with the same care he will do say to diagnose a problematic engine. The terms looked good, almost too good. Hidden among the technical paragraphs were clauses about exclusivity and hidden penal ties that seemed innocuous but at teeth. "I need some time to review this," he said, handing the document back. Their representative couldn't completely hide his disappointment, clearly having expected an immediate signature. But perhaps I imagined that Hank's sudden wealth had dulled his common sense. The following weeks brought a steady stream of salesmen, representatives, and consultants of all sorts. Each owner had a different proposal, a revolutionary idea, or a surefire plan to turn Miller's garage into a national powerhouse. Some arrived in luxury cars, others carrying briefcases full of colorful L charts and rosy projections. One of them, a young business consultant with a freshly minted MBA and a carefully crafted city accent, spent 2 hours explaining how Hank could too run his garage into a national franchise. "You could have 50, maybe 100 locations in 5 years," he declared, brimming with enthusiasm for the numbers he envisioned in his own bank account. "We'd standardize everything, create a stronger and expand into their cities." Hank listened patiently, just as she had listened to customers' problems for years. But something inside him was cautious. His father's words echoed in his memory. "An honest mechanic is worth more than a shop full of shiny tools." It was during one of these visits that the first tangible sign of change arrived at the garage. Allergy truck parked outside one Tuesday morning, delivering the new hydraulic lift Hank had ordered. The installation drew a small crowd of onlookers, neighbors, former clients, even a few competitors, observing from a distance with inscrutable expressions. "Is it true you're turning this place into a franchise?" Someone in the crowd asked while the technic and set up the equipment. "I heard he's steering it all down to build a brand new place," said another. "Must be a big group of investors behind this, Hank simply smiled and shook his head, focusing on the installation to ensure everything was done properly. The new lift was just the beginning. He had already ordered a computerized diagnostic system and some specialized tools. Yet he made each purchase thoughtfully, each change planned as carefully as you would approach the most delicate oven repair. With new equipment came a new reality. He needed help. He could no longer run everything by himself, especially with the advanced technology acquiring specialized knowledge. Hiring employees proved to be one of his most challenging decisions so far, not just for practical reasons, but for what it meant to alter his solitary routine. The first hero was Kevin, his nephew, who had long insisted on working at the garage. With a degree in mechanical engineering and expertise in automotive electronics, he was essential for handling the new system, as Hank remembered Kevin as a child, playing with toy Carson, the garage floor while his father worked. Now, at 25, he brought not only technical skills, but an infectious enthusiasm for the future. Next came Cody, a young trainee from the local technical college, full of energy and eager to learn. Hank met him by chance when the boy stopped by, looking for a potential internship. There was something in Cody's eyes, a mix of determination and humility, that reminded Hank of himself. Decades earlier, finally, Betty, an administrative assistant, recommended B, an old customer, joined to handle the growing paperwork. At 45, divorced with 2 kids in college, she brought valuable life experience and methodical knack for organizing tasks. Her practical approach soon became indispensable and stable to the garage's daily operations. You rechanging the whole look of this street, Bob commented a few weeks later when Hank came Ebethedner for his morning coffee. Indeed, the transformation was obvious. The garage's facade had been renovated, although Hank insisted on keeping the old ZGN, just restoring its colors. The windows were now clean and bright, allowing passers-by a glimpse of the gleamin' new equipment inside. But note all changes where visible or positive. With growth came the first conflicts. Spring had finally arrived in Harmony Creek, transforming the town into a mosaic of colo arsen scents. The trees lining the street near Hank's garage were delicate blossoms, their branches swaying gently in the mild breeze. It was morning like many others, or so it seemed, until the door chime sounded in a way that would change everything once again. Hank was leaning over the new diagnostic system, trying to interpret a set of particularly complex error codes on a late model BMW, when Betty called his attention. "Mr. Morris, there are two customers here askingy for you." Something in Betty's tone made him look up immediately. She rarely interrupted him during a diagnostic unless it was truly important. Wiping his Anson-Thiever present shop rag, Hank headed for the renovated yet still cozy reception area. That was when his heart nearly stopped. Standing by the counter were two people he'd never forgotten, Olivia and Lily. But they were no longer the semester ninth. It took them in from the storm. Their transformation was remarkable. Olivia wore a stylish navy blue business suit tee, hair and disheveled dark hair now perfectly styled, framing a face that, though it still bore traces of concern, radiated a new, calm confidence. Beside her stood Lily, now a bittler, in a floral dress and shiny leather shoes. Her golden curls were neatly tied with a satin ribbon, and her blue eyes, once so fearful, now beamed with childlike vitality. "Mr. Jack," Lily reacted first, running toward him with open arms, all semblance of formality forgotten in her childish enthusiasm. Hank knelt to her, noticing she still carried the same cloth duel, now visibly restored, but undeniably the same companion. "From that memorable night you kept my drawing," Lily exclaimed, pointing to the wall behind the counter, where the picture she deemed was now framed in a simple but elegant frame. "Of course I kept it," Hank replied, his voice thick with emotion, "it's one of my most treasured possessions." Olivia approached then, the click of her heels echoing on the new shop floor. Her perfume was subtle but sophisticated, a world away from the scent of Irandic's house tea and the hads around it. "Here on that's no winnie, Geechee ta Jack," she said simply, extending her hand. But instead of shaking it, Hank pulled her into a brief, warm hug. "Here it's good to see you both," he said, aware of how his employees watched the scene with undisguised curiosity. "Shall we go into my office?" Hank's office was one of the Fewaras in the garage that retained its original simplicity, though it now featured modern computer equipment and air conditioning. The walls still bore the same old photograph including the one of his father on opening the "You haven't changed a thing," Olivia observed, scanning the room with a nostalgic smile. "Some things don't need changing," Hank replied, indicating chairs for them. "But Yautwa, you look wonderful." Olivia nodded, settling Lily onto her lap. "We're wearily are in fact Jack came for two reasons: first, to say thank you, and second, to explain." Hank raised his hand. "You'dn't tell mean explanation." "Ido," Olivia insisted, especially after she motioned vaguely toward their novatage area visible through the office window after everything. And so Olivia began her story. Lily played absently with her doll, seemingly oblivious to the adults' conversation, though she occasionally glanced up with keen interest. "My real name is Elise Dio," she began. E. Moore was CEO of Dio Technologies, one of Thelar, just cybersecurity software companies, in he country. She paused, watching Hank's reaction. "You've probably never heard of it, but Tour Sisters Systems protect some of the biggest corporate ions in America." Hank nodded slowly. The name Dio sounded vaguely familiar, maybe from a news article somewhere. 2 years, ego discovered some discrepancy, as in our books at first. I thought they were here, but the more I investigated, the more I realized I was dealing with something huge. Olivia lowered her voice, thought, hey, we're alone. My ex-husband Henry, who was CFO, was involved in la money laundering. He was susingurko empañas affront for questionable operation. As Sophie snuggled closer to her mother, as if sensing the tension in her words. Olivia automatically stroked her daughter, Cher, the gesture offering comfort as much to herself as to Sophie. When I confronted Henry, he did not react while he threatened to take Sophie from Matu's high's connections to destroy him. Professionally, legally, he had powerful contacts, people who would do anything for money. She took a deep breath, so it did the only thing I could have gathered. Alt evidence I could find sentido the author ites through secure channels took Sophia Endran. Hank recalled the night he found them standy and ginthas now with only 2 small suitcases. It now made sense why their luggage seemed a styly packet and why Olivia constantly looked over her shoulder. He spent months in hiding, she continued, moving from city to city, staying under a sum, Ednam in cheap motels, Henry Hader sources, Upel searching for us, that show Weendadupen, Ridgemont that, snowy night tour, money was almost gone, the car had broken down miles away, and Sophie had a fever, and the new appeared. Sophie interrupted suddenly, looking away from Hurdle. Like an Engelmummy said. Hank felt his cheeks warm. I just did what an Yona would do. No, Olivia shook her head emphatically. Not everyone would open their hometoto strangiona winter's night note. Everyone would offer help. Without questions or demands, you gave us more than a roof that night. Jack, you gave us hope. She paused, taking an envelope out of her leather briefcase. The authorities finally acted on the evidence I provided. Henry is in prison along with several of his associates. The company underwent a complete overhaul and resumed control 6 months ago. Hank looked at the envelope in her hands, a suspicion forming in his mind. The donation, he said simply. Olivia nodded. It was the least I could do when I took back controloni of my first acts was stof in the waitore, pay what Yawad Buddhithad to be discreet through intermediaries. There were still and still Lara dangerous people out there. 2 million is a lot more than just a thank you, Hank observed. It's an investment, Olivia corrected. An investment in kindness, in decency, in everything you stand for. Look what you've done with it. Modernized your business, created jobs, stayed true to your principles. You proved I was right to believe in you. Sophie slipped off her mother's lap and wandered to the wall where Hank's father's photo hung. He looks nice, she said, pointing to the image. He was, Hank replied softly. He taught me everything I know about being a good mechanic and a decent person. And you've honored that teaching, Olivia said. But I didn't come here just to explain and thank you. I have a proposition, Jack. She opened her briefcase again, taking out another set of documents. Deo Technologies is expanding into automotive security systems. We need trustworthy partners, repair shops that can serve as centers of excellence for installing and maintaining these systems. Hank took the documents, leafing through them. They were advanced technical specs, expansion plans, and partnership proposals. I'm not asking for an immediate answer, Olivia continued. I know it's a significant decision, but I'd like you to consider it. Your shop could be our first official partner outside New York. Sophie, back at her mother's side, lifted her doll. Look, Uncle Jack, Margot is all fixed up. Mommy had her repaired just like you repair cars. Hank smiled at the child, noticing the careful stitching on the doll. The same patches, but now reinforced with neat stitches, its dress cleaned and pressed, its yarn hair combed. Some things don't need replacing, he said. They just need care and attention to keep going. Olivia smiled, understanding the metaphor. Exactly why I want you as a partner. Jack, you appreciate the value of things and of people. It's not just business. The rest of the morning passed quickly, filled with technical discussions about the proposed partnership and lighter moments. Sophie insisted on making a new drawing to hang beside the old one, this time depicting the modernized garage with its new equipment. Her art skills had improved significantly, but still retained that sweet, childlike charm. When they finally said goodbye, it was nearly lunchtime. A driver waited for them outside in a discreet but elegant car. "Weck be seeing more of you," Sophie promised, giving Hank another hug. "Mommy says we're moving nearby," Olivia confirmed with a nod. "We bought a house in the suburbs. Ridgemont seems like a good place to start anew. Don't you think?" Hank watched them climb into the car, Sophie waving excitedly out the window until they rounded the corner. The garage felt different now, as if their return had closed a circle, completing a story begun on that snowy night. Betty appeared at his side, holding a cup of coffee. "So it was them," she said simply. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Hank answered, taking the cup. "It was them." "And the donation," Hank smiled, sipping the coffee. "Some stories are best kept in the heart, Clara." Returning to work, Hank felt something inside him shift. The doubts that sometimes still haunted him about his decisions, about the garage's future, had dissipated. Olivia and Lily's homecoming wasn't just the end of a chapter. It confirmed he had done the right thing. That kindness and integrity still had a place in the business world. Sophie's new drawing soon found its place next to the old one on the reception wall, quietly telling a story of transformation, not just of the garage, but of all the lives that had intertwined that memorable winter. And as Hank turned his attention back to the BMW awaiting diagnosis, he knew his garage had become more than just a business. It was a living testament to how a simple act of compassion could spark waves of change, reaching far beyond their origins. The future now lay before him like a newly paved road, full of possibilities but anchored by the values that had guided him all along. Somewhere along that road, he knew, there would be more stories to tell, more lives to touch, more reasons to believe that sometimes the biggest miracles begin with the smallest acts of kindness. Spring continued to unfold in Harmony Creek, and with it, a new story was being written at Miller's garage, a story of second chances, transformation, and above all, the enduring power of human kindness. Autumn had arrived in Harmony Creek, painting the trees in shades of red and gold. Hank watched the leaves dancing in the wind through his renovated office window at the garage, his thoughts drifting back to the extraordinary events of recent months. The partnership with Dio Technologies was going well, bringing renewed energy to the business his father had built. The phone rang, pulling him from his reverie. It was Betty, her voice laced with an unusual urgency. "Mr. Morris M. Dio is here. She seems upset." Hank frowned. Olivia never showed up unannounced, especially during business hours. "Please ask her to come in." When Olivia entered his office, Hank immediately sensed something was wrong. She was pale, her hands clenching the handle of her leather briefcase nervously. Her eyes, typically so assured and determined, held a shadow of anxiety he hadn't seen since that snowy night. "Is Sophie all right?" was his first question, genuine concern in his voice. Yes, Olivia answered quickly, taking the seat he offered. "She's at school, actually, Jack. I need to talk to you about something important, something I should have told you long ago." Hank watched as she opened her briefcase with trembling fingers, taking out an old, yellowed folder. The faded company logo on the cover made his heart skip a beat. Dio Enterprises, a name his father had often mentioned in his final years, always with a mix of bitterness and resignation. "You recognize this, don't you?" Olivia asked softly, noting his reaction. Hank nodded slowly. "Your last name, I should have made the connection before Dio like Raymond Dio." "My father," Olivia confirmed, her voice laden with emotion. "The man who built an empire by crushing small businesses across the country." The silence that followed was heavy, steeped in decades of untold history. Hank looked at the photo of his father on the wall, recalling late nights watching him battle mounting debts and predatory contracts that strangled his dream. It wasn't mere coincidence that I ate up at your shop that night, Olivia continued, opening the folder. I had looked for you, Jack. Your name appeared on a list I found in my father's files after his death. She started pulling out documents, old contracts, internal memos, yellowed photos. Each page revealed another layer of a dark strategy of financial manipulation and systematic destruction of small, family-run businesses. My father had a method, Olivia explained, her voice trembling slightly. He identified well-established family businesses in mid-sized towns, places with tradition and the community's respect. Then, through his network of shell companies, he exerted pressure, exclusive supplier contracts, predatory bank loans, unfair competition. Hank lifted one of the documents, immediately recognizing his father's signature at the bottom. It was a loan agreement from 1995, the year everything started to unravel for the garage, with terms he knew were impossible to meet. The end goal was always the same, Olivia continued. Force the owners to sell at a fraction of the real value, then resell the land or convert the businesses into parts of bigger chains. I remember, Hank said quietly, his voice both firm and subdued. 1995 was the year our real trouble began. Suppliers canceled long-standing contracts, then the bank inexplicably raised our interest rates. My dad, he paused, controlling his emotions. My dad fought until the end, but every day brought a new battle. Olivia gently touched his arm. Your father was one of the few who stood his ground. Jack, he refused to sell and kept fighting even when all odds were against him. That's why your name was specially noted in my father's files, an example of provincial stubbornness, as he used to say. Peter Morris wasn't stubborn, Hank replied, with a hint of pride. He was honest. He believed a business was about more than profit. It was about people, about community. I know, Olivia said sadly. And that same honesty is what I saw in you that snowy night, the same willingness to help without questions or expectations. She pulled out yet another, more recent document. When I started investigating my father's dealings after his death, I discovered the extent of the damage he caused dozens of families, ruined lives, destroyed, dreams shattered. I decided to use my inheritance to try to make amends for some of his wrongs. Hence the donation, Hank murmured, the pieces finally falling into place. Yes, Olivia confirmed. But it wasn't just charity or guilt. Jack, it was justice. Your father stood firm to the end, keeping his integrity even when everything was stacked against him, and you carried on his legacy, keeping the shop alive against all odds. She paused, taking a deep breath before going on. When I found out about my ex-husband's illegal activities at Dio Technology, I realized I was following in my father's footsteps, using power and money to destroy lives. That's when I decided everything had to change, to start over. Hank stood, walking over to the window. Outside, the garage buzzed with activity. Mark advising Anthony on a complex diagnosis, Betty sorting paperwork at the counter, customers coming and going, a small universe that had nearly been destroyed by one man's greed. Why tell me this now? He finally asked, turning to face her. Because you deserve the truth, Olivia answered, standing as well. And because, she hesitated, because Sophie asked me about her grandfather yesterday, why we never talk about him, I realized I can't build a future on lies, even lies of omission. She approached the wall displaying Hank's father's photo. Raymond Deo died alone in his New York mansion, surrounded by wealth, but no real friends. Peter Morris died surrounded by respect and love, leaving behind something that outlived him, which one truly succeeded. At life, Hank was silent for a long moment, absorbing all he had learned. So many things now made sense. The inexplicable difficulties his father had faced, the lost contracts, the doors that had shut for no apparent reason. Your father may have tried to destroy this shop, he said at last, but in the end it was his daughter who saved it. There's a certain poetry that isn't there. Olivia looked surprised, not expecting that reaction. Aren't you angry with you? Hank shook his head. How could I be? You're not responsible for your father's actions, Elise. What matters are your own choices. your own deeds. He walked back to his desk, picking up Sophie's recent drawing, the modern, bustling garage. Look what we built from the ruins your father tried to create. Isn't that proof? There's always hope for redemption. Tears rolled down Olivia's cheeks. When Sophie and I arrived that night, I wasn't just fleeing Henry. I was running from a legacy of destruction. You gave us more than a roof. Jack, you gave us a chance to do better this time. Hank pulled a tissue from his drawer, offering it to her. You know what my dad always said, a broken engine can be fixed in two ways. You can replace everything that's damaged, or you can figure out why it broke and fix it the right way. I think the same goes for legacies. Olivia dabbed at her eyes, a slight smile forming on her lips. That's exactly the kind of thing Sophie would say. She has that simple, childlike wisdom. Just yesterday she told me sometimes we have to fix things even if we didn't break them. Your daughter is wiser than many adults, Hank said with a grin, recalling the first drawing she had made, now framed in the reception area. And you're doing your part to fix what you didn't break too. There's still so much to do, Olivia sighed, putting the old documents back into her briefcase. The list I found there were dozens of other businesses, other families. And you'll help as many as you can, Hank finished, not out of guilt or obligation, but because that's who you choose to be. A burst of children's laughter drifted through the open window, kids on their way home from school, perhaps, breaking the tension in the room and bringing them both back to the present. Sophie asked if we could come for dinner sometime, Olivia mentioned, her voice lighter. She says she misses your vegetable soup. Hank smiled, remembering that first night. Sunday, he suggested. Same apartment, same soup, but this time no secrets between us. Sunday sounds perfect, Olivia agreed, heading to the door. Before she left, she turned back. Jack, thank you for everything. Nothing to thank me for, he replied simply. Just keep making a difference the way you have been. After she left, Hank spent a long while looking at his father's photo. You were right, Dad, he murmured. In the end, honesty and kindness always win, even if it takes a generation or two. The rest of the day unfolded normally at the garage, but something had changed subtly in the air. It was as though an invisible weight had been lifted, a shadow from the past finally dispersed by the light of truth. Locking up that night, Hank thought about how life had a strange way of closing circles. The company that had nearly destroyed his father's dream was now, through the late owner's daughter, helping to transform it into something even bigger and better. On his desk, beside the modern computer system he now used for diagnostics, lay the old wrench his father had cherished. It reminded him that while some things had to change, others, like integrity, kindness, and a willingness to help, should always remain the same. The phone rang one last time before he left. It was Sophie, her animated voice filling the receiver. Uncle Jack, Mom said we're having dinner at your place Sunday. Can I bring Margot? She misses your soup too. Hank laughed, feeling his heart warm. Of course you can, sweetheart. Margot is always welcome here. After hanging up, he glanced once more at his father's photo. See, Dad, sometimes the good we do comes back to us in the most unexpected ways. And so, as the sun set over Harmony Creek, Miller's Garage carried on, not merely a story of surviving adversity, but one of redemption, renewal, and the enduring possibility of fixing not just machines, but also hearts and broken legacies. One by one, the garage's lights turned off, but the light of hope that now shone there was stronger than ever. Because sometimes the greatest victories aren't about defeating enemies, but about turning them into allies for building a better future. Somewhere, Peter Morris and Raymond Dio, two men who in life had represented opposite sides of a battle, might at last find peace in knowing that their children had found a better path, one of healing and reconciliation. Night fell over Harmony Creek, and with it, another chapter in this extraordinary story came to a close. But as Hank well knew, every ending is merely the start of something new, and this new beginning promised to be brighter than anyone could have imagined. Bob's Diner exuded the comforting aroma of freshly baked croissants that Sunday morning. One of the few remaining family-run businesses, the place had kept its original charm, with polished wooden tables and an old-fashioned counter where Bob himself still served his longtime patrons. Hank and Olivia chose a discreet table in the corner, near a window overlooking the main street. Sophie, absorbed in her new sketchbook, occasionally lifted her eyes to watch the passing pedestrians, adding them to her artistic creations. "I've spent the week reviewing old files," Olivia commented, stirring her coffee pensively. "Each folder tells a different story of resilience. Like your father's, there were others who refused to give in." Hank nodded, his eyes roaming over the diner's familiar decor. "Bob told me recently how his father fought to keep this place open. They had rough years, but he was determined to preserve his family legacy." "Have these curtains always been blue?" "Uncle Jack," Sophie asked suddenly, her blue crayon hovering over the paper. Bob, passing by with a tray of coffee, paused to answer. "Since 1962, my dear. My mother swed them by hand when the cafe opened. They faded a bit, but I can't bring myself to replace them." "They're perfect just the way they are," Sophie declared confidently, returning to her drawing with renewed enthusiasm. Olivia took out a small notebook from her purse, already filled with meticulous notes. "I found more than 30 cases here in Harmony Creek alone. Small businesses, family stories, interrupted dreams, each one deserves to be acknowledged and remembered." Like Mrs. Smith, Hank recalled. "I still see her sometimes tending flowers in her garden. I never knew she once had her own flower shop on the same street as your shop." Elise confirmed where that department store stands. Now she held out for 3 years, but in the end, her voice quivered slightly. Sophie, always perceptive of her mother's mood, reached out to touch her arm. "We could plant flowers at Uncle Jack's shop, Mom, like Mrs. Rosalie's garden." The child's innocent suggestion made both adults smile. "You know, Sophie," Hank said, "sometimes the best ideas come from the simplest observations." "Indeed," Olivia agreed, jotting something in her notebook. "I was thinking a lot about big gestures, financial compensation, but maybe we need to start with smaller, more personal actions." "Like hugs," Sophie exclaimed, sliding her drawing to the center of the table. In it, several colorful figures embraced, with small red hearts floating around them. "My teacher said hugs are like medicine for the soul." Hank studied the drawing, moved by the simple truth of its message. "Your daughter has a gift for getting to the heart of things. At least sometimes we get lost in complex plans when the most effective solutions are the simplest." "I've been thinking," Olivia said, scanning her notebook, "what if we used our resources not just for financial compensation, but to rebuild the social fabric of this town? Small businesses are gathering places, hubs, where the community forms naturally." "Like this diner," Hank agreed, gesturing around. "Bob's isn't just a place to get coffee. It's where people meet, share stories, keep the memory of this town alive." "And the shop too, Uncle Jack," Sophie chimed in. "Everybody talks there, even Anthony, who's so shy." Her observation drew laughter, but also reflection. Hank thought of how his garage had evolved in recent months, not only technologically, but in its role within the community. "We need to get to know our town better," he suggested. "Visit other businesses, hear their stories, not just the ones that survived Mayan, but also families who lost everything." Olivia jotted down a few quick lines. "We could start an informal survey, identify not just the material needs, but the lost connections, the social networks that were broken." "And make new friends," Sophie added, immersed in a fresh drawing. Their conversation flowed naturally, occasionally interrupted by Bob refilling coffee cups or a regular customer pausing to say hello. Each interaction underscored the importance of the communal ties they were discussing. By the time they left the diner, morning sunlight had given way to a gentler midday glow. Walking back to the garage, Hank noticed how each establishment they passed held its own story. "What strikes me most," he commented, "is how each small business contributes to the community in its own way. It's not just about products or services." Olivia, holding Sophie's hand as she happily hopped over puddles, nodded. It's about belonging, creating spaces where people feel welcome. Back at the garage, while Sophie settled at her little desk to continue drawing, Hank and Olivia resumed brainstorming. Maybe, Hank mused after a moment, we need something more structured, something that can continue beyond us, something that can grow with the town. Olivia's eyes lit up with understanding. Are you thinking of a foundation? Exactly, he confirmed. A place to pull resources, expertise, and goodwill in an organized way. Sophie, apparently listening while drawing, held up her latest creation, a large, colorful house with lots of people gathered around it. Like one big family, she beamed proudly. Hank and Olivia exchanged meaningful glances, once again marveling at Sophie's simple but profound insight. The day ended with promises of future meetings and many plans yet to be developed. As Hank locked up the garage, he reflected on how much his life had changed over the last months. From a solitary mechanic barely keeping his doors open, he was now part of something bigger, a potential source of real change in people's lives. The foundation would be the next step, an ambitious project requiring careful planning and full commitment. But watching Olivia and Sophie leave, their hearts brimming with hope and resolve, Hank knew they were on the right track. After all, as his father always said, the greatest journeys start with a single step taken in good company. And now, united by a common purpose, they were ready to take that step together. The old textile factory had been completely transformed. Its once crumbling walls now sported a fresh coat of paint in soft tones. The shattered windows had been replaced with modern glass panes that let natural light flood the interior. The place that once symbolized Harmony Creek's industrial decline was about to assume a new meaning. Hank adjusted his tie, an item he rarely wore, as he observed the final preparations for the launch of the Miller Deo Foundation. The large ground floor hall was set up for the ceremony, with chairs arranged in a semicircle and a small improvised stage. On the walls, black and white photographs narrated the town's history, including a special one of Peter Morris standing in front of his newly opened garage. Nervous, Olivia asked, approaching quietly. She held a folder with the foundation's official documents, the result of months of meticulous planning. A bit, Hank admitted with a grin. I've never been great speeches. I prefer the sound of engines to the sound of my own voice on a mic. Mom? Sophie dashed over, her new dress fluttering around her. Mrs. Rosalie is here, and she brought flowers for the stage. Sure enough, the former florist entered the hall, carrying gorgeous arrangements of locally grown flowers. Her eyes sparkled with a joy Hank hadn't seen in years. She'd been among the first to engage with the foundation, contributing not only her floral expertise, but also her life experience. This place, she commented as she arranged the flowers, was where I used to source the finest linens for my shop. Who would have thought I'd return here after so many years for such a beautiful new start? Miller's Garage, now serving as the foundation's model training center, had become a symbol of the possible transformations. Young apprentices not only learned mechanical skills, but also studied ethical business principles and social responsibility. And Anthony, Hank's first trainee, now coordinated the training program. Uncle Jack, Sophie called, tugging at his sleeve. Can I show my special project during the presentation? Sophie's special project was a large mural she'd created, depicting all the local small businesses the foundation aimed to support. Each drawing told a story: the local bakery, Bob's Diner, Mrs. Smith's old flower shop, and, of course, Miller's Garage. Of course you can, sweetheart, Hank replied, ruffling her hair. Honestly, your mural says more about our mission than any speech I could give. Guests began arriving, local shop owners, both old and new, families who had lost their businesses in past decades, young entrepreneurs dreaming of starting something fresh. Each face bore a story, each handshake carried hope. Betty, who'd become indispensable to the foundation's organization, welcomed attendees with her usual efficiency. Mark moved among the groups, explaining the training and mentoring programs that would be offered. "It's time," Olivia noted softly, touching Hank's arm. Stepping onto the small stage, Hank felt the weight of the moment. Scanning the crowd, he recognized familiar faces and new ones. There was Bob, who had fought so hard to keep his diner alive; Mrs. Smith, whose flowers now graced the space; Sophie, sitting in the front row, proudly clutching her mural. "When my father opened Jack's Auto Repair, he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. He taught me that a business isn't just about profit, it's about people, community, and making a difference in others' lives." He paused, his gaze landing on his father's photograph. "Over the years, our town has seen many family businesses close down, many dreams fade, but it has also seen resilience, courage, and above all, at Hope the Morris Deo Foundation is born today, not just as a source of financial support, but as a hub for community renewal, a place where past stories can inspire new beginnings, where experience and innovation come together for a brighter future." Olivia joined him on stage, her presence a silent reassurance. "When I arrived in Ridgemont on a snowy night," she continued, "I found more than shelter. I discovered a lesson in kindness, in how one simple act of generosity can unleash a wave of transformation." Overcome with excitement, Sophie ran up to the stage with her mural. "Look," she exclaimed, holding it up high. "All these people are our family now, everyone together doing good things." The child's spontaneity drew warm smiles and applause, her innocence and enthusiasm perfectly capturing the spirit of what they were trying to achieve. "The foundation will have 3 main pillars," Hank resumed, now more relaxed. "Financial technical support for small businesses, training and mentorship programs, and community revitalization projects. Most importantly, will be a space for connection sharing and rebuilding bonds." When the official ceremony ended, the attendees mingled throughout the renovated space, exchanging stories and hopes for the future. Hank found a quiet moment by the window, watching the town in the late afternoon sun. No longer a place of lost opportunities, but a fertile field for new beginnings. "What are you thinking about?" Olivia asked, approaching with 2 glasses of champagne. "How life twists in unexpected ways," he answered, accepting a glass. "Who'd have thought that snowy night would bring us here?" Sophie appeared between them, her mural now hanging on one of the main walls. "My teacher said sometimes we have to get lost to find the right path." Hank and Olivia exchanged glances over Sophie's head. Once again, the simple wisdom of a child perfectly summed up their journey. The sun began to set over Harmony Creek, its last golden rays streaming through the factory's new windows. A new chapter was unfolding, not just for Hank, Olivia, and Sophie, but for an entire community rediscovering the importance of unity, perseverance, and kindness. The Miller Deo Foundation was more than an economic revitalization project. It was a living testament to how goodness could bloom in the least likely circumstances, how redemption could span generations, and how a single act of compassion could indeed transform the world.